John Turod and Gregg Wallace. They behave very differently. And I observed that actually when the cameras were off, they would go to separate ends of the room. They didn't really communicate or have a connection off screen.
Aggie Mackenzie, presenter of How Clean Is Your House, was on the 2011 series of Celebrity Masterchef. Aggie, good morning.
Good morning.
Did Gregg Wallace behave in a way that made you feel uncomfortable?
I wouldn't say uncomfortable, more kind of a rolling of the eyes. He's like a sort of, well, he behaved like a bit like a sort of Sid James character, very old school in his humour. And yeah, just kind of inappropriate, I'd say, definitely. That's right. But I sort of put it down to he kind of felt awkward and he didn't really know how to make normal conversation with people. And he used to fill all the time with these stupid, unfunny jokes that people kind of had to tolerate.
Jokes of a sort of sexual nature, like the ones we're discussing.
Yeah, just the sort of, schoolboy stuff. It's as if he's never really grown up or been properly supervised and told to kind of watch what he's saying.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, presumably these jokes were being made with members of the production team nearby, for example.
Yeah, I think anyone who would actually listen, I think he didn't have any sort of sense of himself or what he was doing or what damage he might be doing. And I think because he was allowed to carry on behaving like this, it's his sort of natural, MO, and that's the way he behaves. So, why not? If nobody's saying stop, except he was asked to, remedy his behaviour, I think, a few years ago, but obviously not firmly enough.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, Aggie, is you're conveying that these sorts of comments will hit different people's ears slightly differently. But I just wonder if you picked up a sort of a discomfort among fellow contestants as to the sort of atmosphere that created, and whether any one of you as contestants could speak out and report it or pull him up on it and say, do you know what, Gregg, wind your neck in, you're being disgusting.
Do you know what? I can't recall it being so bad, and I can't recall anybody sort of looking at each other and rolling their eyes thinking, wow, this is completely out of order. No, there was not as extreme as that. But I also wonder, why people didn't say something at the time. Although, this is kind of pre-Me Too. Maybe some things happened in the recent past that it's kind of tipped the whole thing into a whole other area. Yeah. It sounds as if that's what's happened.
Yeah, it's interesting this. So that kind of atmosphere, production staff around, and perhaps not feeling like they can speak up as well. Is that
exactly? I mean, it's always the most junior members have the least power and the smallest voices, and they've got most to lose. So if you want to hang on to your job and make your way in telly, you're not going to stick your head above the parapet, are you? And so, somebody in his position, he'd be very well aware of his power, possibly in an unconscious way, but knowing that he can, swagger around and do as he liked, really. Yeah. I mean, it's very different people, John Turod and Gregg Wallace. They behave very differently. And I observed that actually when the cameras were off, they would go to separate ends of the room. They didn't really communicate or have a connection off screen.
That's fascinating. So they're they're forced into a marriage of convenience in inverted commas. Yeah.
Well, yes, and I know what that feels like. So, and I saw it with my eyes, and I saw John Turod at a do not long after that, and I said to him, I said, I know you don't get on to email. He denied it, but it was clear to me. But that's it's hard for someone like John Turod to be witnessing this behaviour, and you're part of this setup, and it's like, it's tiring. Yeah. And I think for people around, he's lost everything now, hasn't he? On a human level, it's a terrible thing. But somebody should have, told him to toe the line and just behave himself.
Yeah.
He's like an embarrassing uncle that nobody has, told to stop behaving in this way.
Yeah. Aggie, it's really fascinating getting your insight. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Aggie Mackenzie, presenter of How Clean Is Your House, but also on the series of the 2011 series, of Celebrity Masterchef, speaking to the kind of atmosphere that sounds slightly odd, I have to say, on the Masterchef set. Just to repeat then, Gregg Wallace's lawyers say it's entirely false that he behaves in a sexually harassing nature. He has stepped away from Masterchef as the investigation takes place. And of course, any other comments and whatnot that come in from production companies and the BBC itself, we will bring them to you.
We're actually going to be speaking after the news to Lorraine Hegarty, who's a former controller of BBC One, about the power that presenters wield and the insecurity in the industry. You know, most people who work on those kind of programmes for production companies or just for the BBC will be on short-term contracts or be freelance. And there tends to be a concern that if somebody speaks up and other people don't, then you could be blacklisted, maybe not get on in the industry anymore, not get the work. If you've been listening to us throughout the course of the morning, you will know that we've been reporting these allegations against Gregg Wallace, who has stepped away from presenting MasterChef. More than a dozen people have come forward with allegations of inappropriate sexual comments. Kirsty Walk has been talking about her experience on Celebrity MasterChef. Ulrika Johnson claims that when she was on Celebrity MasterChef in 2011, he made an inappropriate rape joke. It's worth pointing out that his lawyers say the claims are false. And last night, Gregg Wallace thanked people for their support on Instagram. Let's speak now to Lorraine Hegarty, who is former controller of BBC One. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you for being with us. I just wonder how much of a problem there is here with the BBC and other TV channels just allowing presenters to have so much power that behaviour isn't checked.
I think it's an issue across the industry, not just for the BBC, and possibly across the whole of the entertainment industry, really, films, theatre, everything. And also, I would say it's a society-wide problem because, men in power often abuse that power, whether they're captains of industry. There's a big investigation into Mohammed Al Fayed at the moment. Numerous examples that we could give of men in power behaving badly towards those who don't have the power.
So how do we change that dynamic within the entertainment industry? Because I guess one of the challenges as well is many of the people who work for production companies or work for the BBC or wherever, they will be on short-term contracts or will be freelance and will be frightened that if they speak up and others don't follow, they might not get work anymore.
I think that's very true. And there's more insecurity than ever in our industry at the moment. There's a massive problem with incredibly talented people not finding work. And I'm talking about the kind of people who used to have their order book full probably for the next 3 years. And as you say, most of the people who work on a production are freelancers. And a lot of them are quite junior. So it's very hard to take on somebody like the presenter. And of course, presenters are paid much, much more than anybody else on the production. They have agents who negotiate the contracts, and there can be a culture of, I suppose, pandering to them in every respect. They have dressing rooms, they are sent cars to get them to work, all those different things that don't happen to other people on productions. And we need to create a culture where anybody on a production can speak out and will be taken seriously. And we need to create a culture where men who also don't find this behaviour acceptable start to speak out rather than it always being the women. And if you think about it, not that long ago, people used to make racist comments and they were not acceptable ever, but it's become very unacceptable to publicly make any statement like that now. And if anybody did in the workplace, everybody would say, please don't say anything like that. And we need to have the same culture around sexist comments.
Is it about, I don't know, I just wonder practically how you change the way that presenters are treated in TV. Is it about not giving them that special status? Is it about having bosses that are stronger, who stand up to them and go, that's not acceptable. If you do it again, we're not renewing your contract. You're not coming back. Because in my experience, bosses don't generally, in television, stand up to presenters.
it has to start at the top and the line has to be drawn. And, I think the BBC is very aware of that, particularly in the wake of the Hugh Edwards case. And the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, has said, he's going to stop using the word talent for the on-screen presenters, almost as if they were in a separate category, because it takes, sometimes several dozen people to get a TV show on air, and the presenter is just one of them. And yes, they are the public face of the show, but there are loads of people working incredibly hard to make a show happen. And I think we have to stop behaving as if one person is more important than anybody else. And not all presenters do behave like that. There are a lot of presenters who people enjoy working with, who do treat people with respect. And you're right, the line has to be drawn from the beginning. And if the first time somebody says something, they are pulled up on it, and if they have to sign as part of their contract that they are not allowed to make comments that make anybody feel uncomfortable, then I think we can change the culture. And there's certainly much more awareness about it now.
Do you think it is conceivable that the production team on MasterChef didn't know that these kind of things, if they're proven to be true, were going on?
No, it's not conceivable. I think it was so widespread, and whether his comments were sexual or not, they did make people feel uncomfortable. He did belittle people. He just behaved in a way, well, I heard Aggie Mackenzie say he was like the the uncle who everybody feels a bit embarrassed about. But that is almost sanitizing it, because it had been going on for years. People are talking about 17 years ago, 10 years ago, there was an investigation after he had been on Impossible Celebrities, which deemed that his behavior wasn't acceptable. And yet he still got another contract, and he probably was paid even more. And he was put on other shows other than MasterChef. So, you reward bad behavior. It's like with a toddler. If you reward bad behavior, the bad behavior continues. If you draw a line, and I think sometimes we have to treat presenters as if they're toddlers, then they will stop that behaviour, particularly if it means that their contract won't be renewed.
I was just about to say some presenters do need to be treated like toddlers, but you took the words right out of my mouth.
Who do you mean, Chloe?
Speaks the mothers in us, eh?
Lorraine Hegarty, thank you so much for your time this morning. She is former controller of BBC One.